some motions being brought forward and because of the vote. So having talked to the witnesses, because some members have traveled from far away and like some are really busy and they cannot come back. So out of our 6 witnesses, because we just to make sure that we have a fulsome discussion on this important topic, some of the witnesses are willing to come back to the meeting. So based on my discussion, so today we will have one panel, and we will have Miss Janet McFetridge, Mayor of Champlain, and we will have Apolloni Simzi, Secretary General, today, and the third witness for today will be Rema Jemos Imes, representative to Canada, representing the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. For the other 3, I really want to apologize. We will reschedule the session. The clerk of the committee will be in touch with the other 3 members to reschedule the meetings. So if my request to the members would be that, like, if we can quickly go through that amendment and that motion so that we can at least have the opportunity to hear from the 3 witnesses today, because it will not be possible for them to come back. We have the mayor all the way from New York.
Then we take a vote on the amendment.
So, like, we have a sub-amendment on the floor. So we have a sub-amendment on the floor. I had Ms. Kwan next on the list. Ms. Kwan.
Okay, we're ready to vote.
What?
On the amendment?
Yes.
We're ready to vote, okay?
On the amendment, vote will
Yeah,
go
we
on
have an amendment on the floor, okay, brought by Ms. Lalonde. So, amendment. We have an amendment on the floor. Would you like to do a recorded vote or show of hands?
All in favor, ask all in favor.
20th. All those in favor of the amendment moved by Ms. Lalonde?
Here we go.
Okay,
Jeanette.
adopted. Okay, now we are back to the main motion. All those in favor of the motion? Oh, okay. As amended. Adopted. Okay. So we will now get to our witnesses. So first of all, we will thank you for the cooperation, and we will be hearing from our 3 witnesses and then going into round of questioning. Thanks to the other 3 witnesses for adjusting to come back again. So first of all, we will hear from United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, being represented by Ms. MCS and Ms. Tamjidi. So you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear on this very important subject. As the UN agency serving refugees and asylum seekers in 134 countries and territories, providing technical advice to improve the situation of asylum seekers is an integral part of our advisory role worldwide. I'd like to begin with some critical figures on the state of global forced displacement to put Canada's current situation in the broader context. In the first 6 months of this year, an unprecedented 103 million people have been forcibly displaced by persecution, conflict, and violence. 2/3 of this population are hosted by bordering nations, which are low to middle income countries, often struggling with their own political and economic, social, and challenges. And while displacement figures continue to rise around the world, solutions have unfortunately not kept pace with the average length of displacement spanning 17 to 20 years. Regrettably, the absence of meaningful political action to address the root causes of displacement, along with increased conflict, insecurity, and the effects of climate change, mean this trend is unlikely to be reversed soon. Included in these statistics are approximately 4.9 million asylum seekers. In this larger context of global displacement, it is important to note that Canada currently receives less than 1% of the world's refugees. For those refugees who are able to find a solution in Canada, research demonstrates that they make several contributions to this rich and vibrant multicultural society. Census data provides strong empirical support for the claim that Canada's investment in refugees pays off. For instance, after 20 years in Canada, refugees contribute more to income tax than they receive in social supports. Other key metrics, including home ownership, job creation, and educational achievements, all point to the conclusion that refugees make substantial contributions to Canada. Ensuring safe and unimpeded access to asylum is a legal obligation that Canada, along with 148 other states, have committed to honouring. We understand that there are always challenges in receiving asylum seekers and ensuring that these critical rights are safeguarded. Each time I visit Roxham Road, and the most recent occasion was only 10 days ago, I'm struck by two observations. The first is the humane and dignified approach of authorities and the organized fashion in which Canada processes these claims. The second, equally compelling observation, which comes from my interactions with asylum seekers on each of these visits, is that these are human beings, each with their own individual story to tell, often linked to experiences of trauma, devastation, and loss. And when they come forward seeking Canada's protection, irrespective of how they arrived, they are exercising their right to do so. It is critical to note that when irregular asylum claims are evaluated by Canada's robust system, 61% are accepted as refugees. In human terms, that is 6 in 10 lives saved from persecution. All unique stories of suffering, survival, and resilience. Given Canada's strong and sophisticated system, I have no hesitation in saying that it is well equipped and resourced to continue ensuring safe access to asylum. As communicated to our counterparts, continuing to strengthen triaging and processing efficiencies to enable flexibility in the face of this increase in claims is a key priority. In this regard, we continue to provide support and work with authorities on possible improvements to eligibility processing at the border, which has seen some delays due to the increase in claims. While this ongoing effort to strengthen processes is underway, consideration may be given to allowing temporary work permits for asylum seekers who arrive at the border before they are referred to the Immigration and Refugee Board. Canada has had an excellent track record in ensuring that asylum seekers obtain work permits, but recent increases in arrivals have led to delays in eligibility processing and waits of up to 18 months. This is important not only for the economic and self-reliance of those who are crossing, but also their well-being, their dignity, and overall prospects for integration, not to mention being an important resource for Canada, which is still experiencing labour shortages across many sectors of the economy. Canada continues to be a source of good practice and positive examples relied on by other countries around the world, and UNHCR remains committed to working with government bodies and civil society to ensure that asylum seekers continue to be received in a manner that upholds international legal obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Simzi, Secretary General, representing Alliance de Burundi du Canada. Ms. Simzi, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Honorables députés, l'Alliance des Burundais du Canada est honorée de témoigner aujourd'hui devant ce comité sur une question aussi importante et vitale pour des personnes en situation difficile et même en détresse à un moment de leur vie. En effet, depuis que le chômeur Roxham au Québec a commencé à être utilisé massivement par des demandeurs d'asile dans l'espoir d'avoir une terre d'accueil qu'est le Canada, le nombre n'a cessé de croître depuis un certain moment à l'entrée du territoire. Alors, certaines personnes pensent que le gouvernement a fait une sorte de laxisme en matière d'entrée sur leur territoire, alors que d'autres croient plutôt à une situation préoccupante humanitaire à laquelle le Canada ne peut pas tourner le dos. Mais malheureusement, il n'y a jamais eu de débat concluant sur le pourquoi de ce flux massif des demandeurs d'asile d'une part, et d'autre part, la réponse appropriée en alignement avec les responsabilités du Canada en matière de protection des demandeurs d'asile. Tout observateur de bonne foi, ainsi que les organisations de défense des droits des migrants et des demandeurs d'asile, dont l'Alliance des Burundais du Canada fait partie, convergent pour conclure que cette situation découle du système de protection des demandeurs d'asile en panne depuis plusieurs années aux États-Unis. C'est aussi la question des délais qui posent énormément de problèmes et qui mettent les demandeurs d'asile dans une situation intenable au niveau humain. L'expérience de la plupart des demandeurs d'asile ayant emprunté la voie du chômeur Roxham ont vécu aux États-Unis, ils ont introduit leur demande, mais ils ont attendu sans avoir l'issue au bout du tunnel. Alors, il ne faut jamais perdre de vue que ces demandeurs d'asile sont pour la plupart des mères, des pères et des enfants qui viennent seuls de leur pays d'origine et qui pensent pouvoir être, une fois accueillis, se réunir avec leur famille. Mais malheureusement, aux États-Unis, une fois arrivés là, l'incertitude du système de protection les met dans l'impasse et devient une autre source de problèmes. Alors, des témoignages indiquent que ces demandeurs qui ont été refoulés de la frontière canadienne, malheureusement, subissent parfois les détentions aux États-Unis et cela complique davantage leurs conditions. Alors, fermer le chemin Roxham sans une solution de rechange tangible pour régler ce problème des demandeurs d'asile dans l'impasse serait pour le Canada se servir de sa situation géographique et échapper en partie à ses responsabilités en matière de protection et des demandeurs d'asile. Alors, comme cela a été rapporté par le passé, des demandeurs d'asile désespérés empruntent parfois des chemins malheureusement périlleux au risque de leur vie et même la mort. Alors, c'est en fait de cette situation intenable que les demandeurs d'asile, de ces demandeurs d'asile qui a provoqué le débat sur la controverse autour de l'entente sur les tiers pays sûrs. Nous saluons les efforts du gouvernement fédéral qui a mis en place des infrastructures de base pour prendre en charge les demandeurs d'asile de cette catégorie tout près du chômeur Roxham et qui contribue à aider les réfugiés en général à mieux s'intégrer. Même si des efforts supplémentaires sont encore nécessaires pour accueillir ces demandeurs, nous encourageons toute action qui tende vers des solutions pratiques plutôt qu'une action qui viendrait empirer les conditions de ces demandeurs déjà vulnérables. Il est souhaitable d'allouer, par exemple, plus de ressources à la GRC ou services frontaliers, ainsi que tous ceux qui sont concernés afin de favoriser un travail plus efficace, plus sécuritaire et accorder même des audiences beaucoup plus rapidement aux demandeurs afin de leur permettre, surtout à ceux qui remplissent les conditions, d'accéder sur le terrain du travail. En revanche, des témoignages montrent que les demandeurs ayant passé le chemin par le chômeur Roxham et bien accueillis en tant que réfugiés s'intègrent bien et participent activement au même titre que les autres citoyens pour faire avancer notre pays. À l'épreuve
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Simbizi, like the time is up. You will get an opportunity when we go into round of questioning to speak further. There were 5 minutes for all the opening statements, so you will get an opportunity in the round of questioning. We will now proceed to Ms. Janet McFitridge, Mayor of Champlain, New York. Welcome, Ms. McFitridge. Thank you for traveling from that far. So you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please begin.
Thank you all for inviting me to speak. Roxham Road is better known in Africa than it is in the United States. And I am likely the last American that these refugees meet on American soil as they continue this journey. I cannot walk in their shoes, but I can walk beside them. As these refugees lean into me whispering, I am scared. I am running for my life. People are trying to kill me. I have no other options. I listen attentively, and I join in the last few steps of this journey. Refugees arrive via taxis or private drivers and sometimes on foot, in families, alone, small groups, or in van loads of more than 15. There are looks of confusion, apprehension, fatigue, sadness, a vast array of emotions are visible as they climb out of the taxis. Strangers helping strangers with luggage, children serving as translators for their parents, mothers handing babies to teens or even to me so they can get organized, toddlers wandering as toddlers do. It is a microcosm of humanity working together regardless of language, nationality, or appearance, all under a cloud of fear as they see the RCMP waiting a few feet away. For the majority of these refugees, their prior interactions with police officers have not been positive. I have seen people walk down the path with their hands in the air. Others have fallen to their knees with their hands raised in the snow. Some have said, "Arrest me, I have no other choice but to come here." One woman from Turkey ran down the path sobbing, right into the arms of the officer. He very quietly said, "This is Canada. You don't need to cry. You won't be harmed." Allow me to share a couple of stories from Roxham Road with you. Very recently, a card pulled in with Connecticut plates on it. The young man, all alone, asked me if this was where he could get into Canada. He said his plan was to leave the rental car, but he was very, very nervous. His hands were shaking. He had tears in his eyes. He wanted to know if the police would beat him or harm him in any way. I said no. And as I spoke softly, trying to calm him down, he explained that he was gay, disowned by his parents, fired from his job, and his choice right now was to leave or die. He would be stoned to death if he returned home, so he decided to try Roxham Road. But now he was terrified. I said, "Look at you. You did it. You are here with me, and you are safe. You did it." He smiled and said yes, and after a few more minutes, walked away from the car and down the path. On a frigid day last February, a large van arrived and outpoured a dozen people. Among this group were two little girls, sisters, dressed in matching pink sweatsuits. You know how you dress your children up for a special occasion? These girls were ready for their new life in a new country in brand new clothes, and they were shivering uncontrollably. It was about 5 degrees Fahrenheit that morning. I had no children's coats with me, so I wrapped them in large adult-sized jackets. They were so bulky the girls had trouble walking, but I put my arms around them and steered them toward the trail where they slowly walked into Canada. Day after day, people from all around the world travel on Roxham Road seeking safety and a place to call home. Young men who have hugged me saying they left their mothers behind. Old women all alone. A pregnant woman in labor. Elderly men who can barely walk. Strong mothers who will do anything to protect their kids. And then those precious children who have no choice in this journey. One of those youngsters recently told me how much she liked the stuffed animal I had given her. And she asked, "How long can I keep it?" I said, "It's yours forever." And as she skipped down the path into Canada, she turned around and said, "Thank you. See you later." Humans are naturally rooted to where we were born or have spent time. We need to feel that we belong. The writer Maya Angelou expressed it so well by saying, "The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." Many times the refugees have told me that they did not want to leave home. But violence, drug cartels, threats of starvation, the effects of climate change, persecution for their sexuality or their religion, protection of daughters from FGM. Humans have a strong will to not only survive but thrive, a dream that most of us share regardless of where we were born. The ties that bind us together as humans are stronger than our differences. May each of us do what we can to help all of humanity find home. Thank you.
We will now proceed to our round of questioning, and we will begin our first round with Ms. Rempel Garner. Ms. Rempel Garner, you will have 6 minutes. You can please begin.
Thank you. I'd like to direct my questions to the UNHCR. Thank you for your attendance today and for your work. Some civil society groups have characterized the United States of America as not safe for many refugees. Do you agree with this characterization?
Determination on whether or not the U.S. is a safe country comes down to the two countries who are signatories to the bilateral agreement called the Safe Third Country Agreement. There's a responsibility on the countries that enter into that agreement to do periodic reviews and to determine that the safeguards required in order to make sure that agreement upholds the basic legal standards that are applicable.
Does the UNHCR believe that those standards are in place with the United States?
UNHCR is charged, as I said at the outset, with providing technical guidance and support to governments around the world, incling the United States,
I have,
on areas
5
for
minutes
strengthening
left, so
asylum systems.
I'm just looking at whether or not what the UNHCR's position is on whether or not the United States meets standards set by you that would determine that the United States is safe for refugees.
There is no perfect asylum system in the world. All asylum systems can be strengthened. UNHCR has communicated on the occasions when we feel that certain gaps exist in the UN system. We do that on a bilateral basis. You can also check the public record where we have also expressed concerns about certain practices.
Thank you. So I will take it on the record here that the UNHCR is not making a determination at this committee in this study on whether or not the United States is a safe place for refugees.
I'm not making that determination.
So
here,
could
no.
you provide some clarity on what the UNHCR's position is?
Certainly. I'm happy to do so. There are gaps in asylum system in every country.
Okay.
And where those gaps exist, we provide technical guidance and support to help strengthen those systems. And we have done so on a bilateral basis, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly.
I might try a different line of questioning. How many refugees did the UNHCR refer to the United States for resettlement in 2021?
I'm afraid I don't have that figure handy, but we did make referrals. We
Thank
do
you.
refer refugees to be resettled in the U.S. annually, and we continue to do so.
Has the UNHCR asked the United States to increase its acceptance of refugees for resettlement?
UNHCR asks that of every single country that's a signatory to the Refugee Convention. It is the one thing I repeat on a day-in, day-out basis, as do my colleagues around the world.
So
we need more resettlement.
So with the UNHCR recommending refugees for resettlement to the United States, would it be right to characterize that the UNHCR has determined the United States as to be a safe place for refugees?
UNHCR would not refer refugees to be resettled in a country that is determined to be unsafe.
Thank you. I note that there was a report on activities from the Inspector General's office, a report from the High Commission, which was tabled in October, so about a month ago. And there were some fairly alarming statistics that have come up in previous parliaments in this committee around abuses in UNHCR refugee camps, including 259 cases of sexual abuse and rape in UNHCR refugee camps, a 20% increase in the previous year. I am just wondering how the UNHCR can reconcile some of these figures when pronouncing whether or not a country is safe or unsafe for refugee resettlement, given some of the abuses, grave abuses, that this committee has heard within UNHCR refugee camps.
Well, I'm afraid I haven't had the opportunity to review the report, and I'm sure that there are a number of facts and figures and context in there which would be important for me to review before giving you an answer to that question. But I can tell you that there is a zero tolerance policy for any kind of abuse, either within our organization or with the organizations that we partner with. Beyond that, it's very difficult for me to answer that question because I haven't had the opportunity to review the material that you're citing.
I would ask you to do so. I remember sitting here in this committee about 7 years ago, listening to recent survivors of the Yazidi genocide talk about discrimination that they faced in UNHCR refugee camps by the ethnic majority that was charged with running the camp and how that affected them. Those abuses stay with them today, and it's quite disappointing that the leader of the UNHCR or the representative sent to testify in this committee is not aware of these stats. what this committee needs to hear from the UNHCR is a commitment to accepting these abuses and also to, frankly, move countries like Canada and the US away from suggesting that one of the safest countries in the world is somehow not a place where refugees can find safe harbor. I guess I would just ask if the UNHCR feels that it is beneficial to the integrity of upholding support for immigration in Canada to see the Roxham Road border crossing continue to function as is, particularly with a 2.8 million case backload in the immigration system in Canada.
I'm sorry, I need to unpack that a little bit because I think there were 3 questions embedded in one. And I do...
15 seconds left.
I would like to correct the record that I didn't say I wasn't aware of the report. I said I didn't have the opportunity to review the report. Our Inspector General's office issues a lot of reports. So it's difficult for me to answer one particular point in a report that I have not had the opportunity to review.
I would ask you to avail yourself of doing that.
I would be very
Thank
happy
you.
to do so if you share the details.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Ms. Rempel Garner. We will now proceed to Mr. Ali. I know Mr. Ali and Ms. Kayabaga will be splitting time. So Mr. Ali, you will have 3 minutes and then we will go to Ms. Kayabaga. Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today to share their knowledge and experience. My question is directed to the witnesses from UNHCR. What are the UNHCR's views on agreements where 2 countries work together to share responsibilities when it comes to welcoming asylum seekers and avoid duplications and inefficiencies?
Has no objection to safe third country agreements or agreements designed to ensure that there's responsibility sharing and regional approaches, so long as certain safeguards are built into those agreements and minimum criteria are present, including things like ensuring there is access to safe and efficient asylum systems in either country that is a signatory to the agreement, including ensuring that neither country will return people to situations of danger. Those are just 2 of the criteria that would have to be present. But UNHCR has no objection to such agreements with a view to improving protection and asylum being concluded by 2 independent sovereign states.
Thank you. Could each of the witnesses share with us if they think there would be any negative result if either Roxham Road were shut down or if the Safe Third Country Agreement were amended to shut the entire border to all irregular crossings?
I think.
Can anyone?
Oh,
Yeah.
should I go ahead? Okay.
Yeah, anyone can jump in.
Okay. So, I mean, as an observer who is there daily, my fear would be that if Roxham Road were shut down, that people would cross the border just any place in the woods and the fields and all those remote areas, and I think it would really be a safety issue. That's just from my experience of watching it.
Okay. Thank you. And again from the witness from UNHCR. I'm sorry?
Mr. Ali, I think it's my turn now.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yes,
Go ahead.
thank you so much. Thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to be here, and specifically to Mayor for your compassion and for your very compassionate testimony. I'd like to direct this question to you, actually. Just because my time is really limited, if you could really try to respond that quickly. What are the things that you can suggest that the U.S. and Canada can do to better support asylum seekers crossing these borders?
A suggestion for what the 2 countries can do to better support the asylum seekers? Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
Well, I'm just an American private citizen who's trying to be helpful. The American system, to me, is extremely broken, and at our level with our numbers on the southern border, which you are seeing coming into Canada because that's the pipeline right now, I'm not really sure what the answer is to that, how they could work better together. I think maybe my friend sitting next to me might have a better idea.
Thank you for your response. I will go to Madame Simbizi for my next question. Madame Simbizi, vous avez parlé des témoignages des gens de votre association que vous servez, qui sont sûrement passés à travers cette ouverture. Comment est-ce que vous pensez qu'on peut améliorer pour mieux soutenir ces gens et quel genre de feedback que vous avez de la part de la communauté qui est passée à travers ces ouvertures?
Merci pour la question. Je voudrais vous dire que effectivement, nous avons des témoignages de la part de des membres de notre communauté qui effectivement ont emprunté cette voie-là. Et nous pouvons dire avec assurance que quand ils sont reçus, ils se sont bien intégrés. Il y en a qui viennent, qui étudient. Il y en a d'autres qui vont sur le terrain de travail et qui parviennent vraiment à avoir une très bonne intégration dans la communauté. Je pense que la difficulté se trouve justement dans cette façon d'être accueilli. La proposition que l'ABC peut-être ferait, et que nous l'avons dit un tout petit peu dans notre présentation, c'est de pouvoir augmenter, donner plus de ressources pour que ce soit la GRC, que ce soit le service des frontières. Donc,
Madame
pour pouvoir
Simbizi,
les accueillir.
est-ce que vous savez pourquoi les gens choisissent d'utiliser cette ouverture-là et non le choix d'utiliser des frontières normales qui sont déjà ouvertes? Avez-vous une idée pourquoi?
Je pourrais dire peut-être, je n'ai pas fait d'enquête comme ça, mais j'ai entendu certaines personnes qui parlent ce sont des gens qui, en fait, sont dans l'impasse. Ça veut dire ils n'ont aucun autre choix. Voyez-vous, des personnes qui prennent, comme le disait l'autre conférencière, qui prennent vraiment le risque de passer même par des chemins où ils peuvent, dans un monde d'hiver rude et risquer la vie. C'est parce qu'ils n'ont plus aucun choix. Donc, comprenez par là que les personnes qui prennent...
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Simbizi. Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. We will now proceed to Mr.
Thank you to the witnesses.
We will now proceed to Mr. Brunel Decep for 6 minutes. Mr. Brunel Decep, you can please begin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais y aller vite. Je veux remercier les témoins d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui pour cette étude très importante. Je veux essayer de parler aux 3 témoins, donc je vais aller quand même assez rapidement. Si je peux répondre à la question de Madame Kayabaga, là, si les gens passent pas par la frontière, c'est qu'ils vont être refoulés à cause de l'entente sur les tiers pays sûrs. Donc, Madame Simbizi, certains groupes de défense des migrants, certains groupes d'associations d'avocats en immigration nous disent qu'il faut suspendre l'entente, du moins jusqu'à temps que les discussions entre les États-Unis et le Canada arrivent à quelque chose de positif, là, parce que les gens seraient accueillis au poste frontalier dignement plutôt que d'avoir à passer dans un chemin dans le bois. Êtes-vous plutôt d'accord avec cette proposition-là?
Je pense que la proposition d'accueillir ces personnes de cette façon, c'est peut-être pas la meilleure voie, mais dans tous les cas, le passage le plus sûr qu'ils peuvent avoir pour l'instant, c'est celui-là. Sinon, on les forcerait probablement à emprunter des chemins beaucoup plus...
Tout à fait. Mais donc, vous seriez d'accord à ce que les gens arrivent au poste frontalier et soient accueillis dignement si on suspendait l'entente? Ce serait le résultat de tout ça. Donc, vous seriez d'accord avec la suspension de l'entente pour accueillir les gens au poste frontalier régulier?
Pour les accueillir, est-ce que je comprends par là qu'il faut suspendre l'entente pour que les gens puissent rentrer par Roxham?
Non. Si on suspendait l'entente, les gens pourraient passer par les postes frontaliers réguliers. Donc, ils seraient accueillis dignement tout le long de la frontière. Il n'y aurait pas à passer par un seul point qui est chemin Roxham.
Alors, ça veut dire que s'ils prennent cette voie, c'est qu'ils n'ont pas les moyens ou peut-être les raisons qui puissent passer par le chemin régulier. c'est des personnes qui sont dans des situations désespérées. Je ne pense pas que ça puisse être faisable.
Non, je pense qu'on s'est mal compris, mais c'est pas grave. En suspendant l'entente, ils peuvent passer par les postes frontaliers, ils auraient le droit. Donc, ils feraient la même demande plutôt que de le faire à Roxham, ils le feraient aux douanes. Vous seriez d'accord avec ça?
Si le Canada leur donne la possibilité de le faire.
Merci beaucoup. Madame la mairesse, bravo pour votre travail. Je vous ai même vu à la télévision. Donc, félicitations. Vous avez parlé de fourgonnettes. Ce qu'on a appris d'ailleurs à la télévision dans un reportage, c'est que certaines de ces fourgonnettes-là, ce seraient des réseaux de passeurs criminels qui chargeraient entre 600 jusqu'à 10 000 $ par personne pour amener des gens qui ont besoin d'aide au chemin Roxham. Ils se font carrément voler leur argent. Est-ce que vous êtes au courant de cette situation?
That they're trafficking, that they're charging that much money. I mean, there's no way that I can know anything about the money. I have my suspicions, but honestly, when people arrive, and it's that many people, there could be 30, 40, 50 people at once, usually families. My concern is, do they have winter coats, do they have hats, and do they have gloves? And that's all I can say.
Bien sûr.
But I agree that that's a big problem and that needs to be shut down.
Et évidemment, les gens ne veulent pas nécessairement en parler ouvertement qu'ils ont dû payer des passeurs criminels. Et donc, ça nous briserait le cœur de savoir que c'est le cas, effectivement. Bravo encore pour votre travail. Je vais m'adresser à Mme Ismaïs, à vous deux, mesdames. Bon, ce qu'on a su, c'est que des défenses d'associations de migrants sont pour la suspension de l'entente sur les tiers pays sûrs, des associations d'avocats en immigration. On a su par différents reportages qu'il y a des réseaux de passeurs qui volent carrément ces pauvres gens-là pour les amener au chemin Roxham. On a aussi su que ça prend plus de 14 mois avant d'avoir un permis de travail une fois entrés sur le territoire canadien. Donc, des gens vivent dans une pauvreté extrême puisqu'ils ont l'aide sociale et c'est vraiment pas beaucoup pour survivre. Et il y a des gens, 50% des demandeurs d'asile qui passent par Roxham seront finalement expulsés lorsque leur dossier sera réglé. Donc, il y a des gens qui vont attendre 4 à 5 ans, qui vont s'être intégrés, qui au Québec vont avoir appris le français, vont travailler et en bout de ligne vont se faire expulser vers leur pays d'origine. Est-ce que selon vous, c'est la manière pour un pays du G7 d'accueillir des gens?
I will address a part of that question, and I'll let my colleague complement as well. First, just a small correction in terms of 50% of those people actually being returned once a determination is done. So 61% of irregular arrivals are accepted as refugees in Canada currently. That's quite a high statistic in terms of understanding that these people have merits in their claim. And then the ones that do not get accepted have to go through an appeal process. From the irregular arrivals that do go through an appeal process on the merits of their claim, a third of them are either accepted as refugees or returned for another refugee hearing because there was a problem in the process before. And if all of the appeal process has been exhausted, then UNHCR recommends states to return people to their countries of origin to maintain the integrity of the asylum system. And I'll let my colleague as well address a few other parts of your question.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat which parts you wanted answered that she didn't.
Non, mais parce que on n'a pas les mêmes chiffres, là. Donc, vous nous dites que c'est ça les chiffres, mais est-ce que vous trouvez ça normal que des gens qui se sont intégrés, qui parlent français, qui travaillent, puis au bout de 4 ans, on leur dit de retourner dans leur pays, est-ce que vous trouvez que le délai est normal?
That part is not necessarily something for UNHCR to comment on.
Okay.
We do note that to keep a very sound asylum system that is strong, that it be used only for asylum. So once someone has exhausted all their levels of appeal, that they either be regularized through another immigration pathway or they be returned to their country of origin.
Est-ce que vous qui travaillez
Sorry
avec,
for interrupting,
j'imagine...
Mr. Brunel Desab, time is up.
On avait une belle discussion.
We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you will have 6 minutes. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your presentation and for your patience today. My first question is actually to the representatives from the UNHCR. Given that some 61% of the asylum claimants crossing over to Canada actually succeed in proving their claim that they are genuine refugees, why then do you think Canada should keep the Safe Third Country Agreement? Because all that process is doing is forcing people to go through unsafe means to get to safety. If the government suspended or lifted the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States, then people would be able to cross over in regular border crossings, get to safety, and still make their claim. Wouldn't that be a better option than to forcing people to trek through snow and in terrible conditions and possibly losing their lives?
It's not for UNHCR to comment on the particular mode that Canada wishes to use for controlling its border. It's an independent sovereign state. As long as the process upholds their international legal obligations, that is our primary concern. And as I said, on my visits to Roxham Road, which are fairly regular, those that I make and that my colleagues make, what we have observed is that notwithstanding the fact that we are using an irregular entry point, the process is handled with a significant degree of care, and it is meeting the minimum legal requirements.
Thank you. Yeah, the matter is actually being challenged in courts right now in Canada. We'll see what the Supreme Court of Canada says about violations of basic human rights. Maybe back to more of a human level, I'll turn my question to the mayor. Given that that's the reality, and you see firsthand of the people coming through and the desperation that they're in, and the story that you just related to us. So I guess my question to you, not for necessarily for you to tell Canada what should be done, but from a human perspective, do you think that it makes sense if Canada were to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement and so that people would be able to get to safety in a safe way and not put their lives in jeopardy?
Well, it's also very hard for me to really make that statement too. It does seem like it would be safer if they could go to the regular crossing and ask for asylum there. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I have no way to influence the decisions in Canada or in my own country, for that matter, at that level. So that's all I guess I can really say about that.
Well, thank you for that. Very diplomatic to all the witnesses. I get it that you're not here to tell Canada what to do. However, as a Canadian, I'm seeing what's happening, and I vehemently disagree with the Canadian government's approach to this by creating the Safe Third Country Agreement, putting it in place, forcing people to go through irregular means and putting their lives in jeopardy. I don't think it's the right thing to do, nor do I think is a humanitarian thing to do, even though that we have processes to allow for people to make a claim afterwards. There's a better way forward, and we don't have to put people through that process. Now, in the United States, part of the reason why people choose to cross over irregularly here to Canada, I know especially in the beginning when the Trump administration was in power, and part of the issue is that people who are faced with exploitation as a woman and who are faced with challenges in that way have fled their country because they're being persecuted because of their gender. Some are being persecuted because of their sexual identity. And as a result of that, they are trying to get to safety. And the United States has outright to refuse these individuals as asylum claims. Is that still happening in the United States? Maybe the UNHCR can share that information with us.
I will address that question. Recently, in 2021, UNHCR welcomed changes in the U.S. to their decision-making process related to gender-based and gang-related violence claims. So they walked back and they repealed a decision that was called the Matter of AB, that made it more difficult for these populations to make asylum claims in the U.S. So currently there are improvements in the system related to gender-based violence claims and gang-based violence claims in the U.S., and we continue to work with U.S. authorities to improve their system specifically related to these types of claims.
When you say you're working with them to improve the system, what does that mean?
That is in line with our role internationally, like it is here in Canada. We work on a bilateral basis with the U.S. government to make recommendations on the way they determine refugee claims and put forward ways to strengthen that system. And a lot of those recommendations sometimes are publicly available on our websites, and they're also included in a lot of the amicus briefs that we file in various court applications as well.
For the people who fear for their life, who's declare that they are gay, for example, and who are being hunted down, disowned by their own families, do they know that in the United States that they would actually be able to make a claim? And do you know what information do you have that you can share with us? How many of those individuals' claims have been rejected?
I don't have that statistic on hand with me, but I will say that the U.S. does have a system where people could access counsel, get information on the asylum claim process, and information is also readily available online. And that's all I could address at this moment to that question.
Would you be able to provide those stats to us?
We could provide statistics on, I will undertake to look to see if we have those statistics first and provide them to the committee as well.
Thank you. With this, this panel comes to an end. On behalf of all the members of this committee, I really want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before the committee and for your patience, and thanks for your adjusting with the schedule of the committee. So it was great to have you all, and if there is anything which you would like to bring to the attention of the committee, and because of time you have not been able to discuss it, you can always send a written submission to the clerk of the committee, and that will be circulated to all the members. Thank you once again, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.